At 8:07 p.m. Eastern on April 10, 2026, the Orion spacecraft hit the Pacific Ocean at 20 miles per hour. The parachutes collapsed into the water. The airbags inflated. Commander Reed Wiseman reported 4 crew green, confirming all astronauts were conscious and uninjured. The world celebrated. The cameras showed the capsule bobbing in calm seas off San Diego, backlit by the fading California sunset. And then the broadcast shifted to the crew extraction, the helicopter hoist, the smiling faces aboard the USS John P. Murtha. The narrative was triumph. The mission was over. But the mission was not over. The most important part of Artemis II was just beginning, and it was happening underwater. Before anyone opened the hatch, before the first astronaut was lifted out, Navy divers from Explosive Ordnance Disposal Group 1 slipped into the Pacific and swam beneath the capsule. They carried cameras. Their job was to photograph the heat shield from below, capturing every crack, every divot, every discoloration in the charred avcoat material before salt water could corrode the evidence and before the recovery equipment could scratch or mask the surface. They were working against the clock, against the ocean, and against stronger than expected currents that forced them to redeploy their inflatable work platforms and adjust their approach to the capsule. Navy Diver Chief Chase McCain later described the moment they heard the sonic boom of Orion's re-entry overhead. As soon as we heard that sonic boom and saw it come in, it was like, all right. Then the work began. The reason those photographs mattered more than anything else that evening is the heat shield. Every question about the future of the Artemis program, every question about whether humans will land on the moon in 2028, every question about whether the Orion spacecraft is safe to fly again comes down to what the divers saw on the bottom of that capsule, because the heat shield has failed before, and if it failed again, nothing else matters. In November 2022, the uncrewed Artemis I capsule returned from the moon and splashed down in the Pacific. From the outside, the mission looked perfect. The capsule flew to the moon, orbited for nearly 3 weeks, and came home. But when technicians pulled it from the water and inspected the heat shield at Kennedy Space Center, they found something that sent a shock through the engineering team. The shield was covered with more than 100 cracks and large divots. Chunks of the avcoat material, the ablative layer designed to char and vaporize in a controlled pattern to protect the spacecraft from temperatures reaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, had broken away in fragments. They were not supposed to do that. The avcoat was supposed to erode evenly, layer by layer, carrying heat away as it burned. Instead, it had cracked from the inside out. NASA's investigation took nearly 2 years. What they found was that the avcoat material was not permeable enough. During re-entry, as the outer surface charred under extreme heat, gases were generated inside the material. On Apollo, the avcoat had been formulated to let those gases vent through the char layer. On Artemis, the formulation was different. The tiles were manufactured differently. The gases had no way out. They built up pressure beneath the surface. And when the capsule dipped back into the atmosphere on the second pass of its skip-entry trajectory, the already pressurized material cracked and blew apart. Chunks of the heat shield went flying into the plasma stream behind the capsule. Any one of those failure points could have burned through to the aluminum structure beneath and killed a crew if there had been one aboard. Former NASA engineer Charles Camarda, a heat shield expert who flew on the first shuttle mission after Columbia, put it bluntly. The fact that no burn-through occurred on Artemis I was, in his assessment, dumb luck. For Artemis II, NASA faced a choice: redesign the heat shield entirely, which would have delayed the program by years, or keep the same shield and change the way the capsule flies through the atmosphere. They chose the second option. Instead of the skip-entry trajectory used on Artemis IV, where the capsule bounces off the upper atmosphere and re-enters a second time, Artemis II flew a modified, steeper path. The idea was to reduce the time the capsule spent in the temperature range where the gas buildup occurred, letting the AV coat breathe instead of trapping pressure. Camarda publicly called this approach playing Russian roulette. Former astronaut Danny Olivas, who served on the independent review team, told CNN that this was a deviant heat shield and that it was not the heat shield that NASA would want to give its astronauts. NASA flew anyway, and now the capsule was in the water and the divers were underneath it, and the cameras were recording what the shield looked like after surviving a 25,000 miles per hour re-entry with 4 human beings sitting on top of it. Within hours, photographs from the splashdown began circulating online. One image in particular went viral across social media over the weekend following the mission. It showed what appeared to be a large white patch on the otherwise dark and scorched underside of the capsule. To the space community, it looked like a missing chunk. The reaction was immediate. Posts speculated that the avcoat had failed again, that a section of the shield had been ripped away during re-entry, that the same cracking pattern from Artemis I had repeated itself on the crewed mission. The implication was terrifying. The heat shield had failed with people aboard, and NASA was not talking about it. NASA responded. Administrator Jared Isaacman addressed the images directly on social media, stating that no unexpected conditions were observed from diver imagery taken shortly after splashdown, or from initial inspections aboard the Mertha. He said the white discoloration corresponded to the heat shield's compression pad area and was consistent with what engineers had seen in pre-flight testing. The white material, according to analysis shared by observers at the recovery site, appeared to be titanium oxide residue left by the separation bolts that connect the heat shield to the crew module, a normal byproduct of the bolt firing process. A freelance photographer aboard the Mertha confirmed that the discoloration was exactly that, and that there were no holes. But Isaacman's statement included a careful caveat. He said he was hesitant to get ahead of a proper data review, and that NASA would complete a full review across all systems, including the thermal protection system, and make the results publicly available. Howard Hu, the Orion program manager, said during the post-splashdown press conference that they had 2 heat shield experts already aboard the Mertha, and that detailed inspections would begin the moment the capsule was hoisted into the ship's well deck. The capsule would then be transported by truck back to Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the kind of analysis that cannot be done at sea: high-resolution imaging, material sampling, and cross-sectional cuts of the avcoat blocks to examine whether the same gas-trapping failure had occurred beneath the surface, even if the exterior looked cleaner than Artemis I. That analysis is happening now, and the results will determine everything. Here is what NASA acknowledged during that same press conference. In the same hour, they were calling the mission a triumph. The heat shield returned with expected divots and signs of cracking. The damage was not as severe as on Artemis I, but it was present. The modified trajectory reduced the damage, it did not eliminate it. The failure mode remains active. The shield performed well enough to bring the crew home on this specific trajectory. However, NASA does not intend to use that trajectory for future missions. For Artemis III and beyond, NASA is implementing a redesigned avcoat formulation with improved porosity, one that will let the gases vent properly the way Apollo's heat shields did. That new formulation has never flown. It will be tested for the first time on a crewed mission. The heat shield was not the only thing engineers found when they examined the capsule. The service module, which was jettisoned before re-entry and burned up in the atmosphere, had carried a helium leak in its oxidizer pressurization system for most of the mission. The leak rate in space was an order of magnitude higher than what had been observed during ground testing. Kshatriya acknowledged that the valve system would require an extensive redesign before Artemis IV, the mission that will actually land astronauts on the moon, and requires the service module to perform a lunar orbit insertion burn under full pressurization. The toilet system had malfunctioned at least twice during the outbound leg, when ice formed in the wastewater vent line and the internal fan jammed. The satellite phone connection glitched during recovery. A latching current limiter failed, the same failure type that had been documented repeatedly on Artemis I 4 years earlier. Each of these is documented. Each was discussed at the post-splashdown press conference. Each was framed as a learning opportunity, as data that will improve future missions. And that framing is accurate. Test flights are supposed to find problems. That is their entire purpose. But there is a difference between a test flight that finds problems and closes them, and a test flight that finds problems and defers them. Artemis II found problems and deferred nearly all of them to the next mission. The heat shield fix is deferred to Artemis III. The valve redesign is deferred to Artemis IV. The toilet fix is ongoing. The current limiter failure, first documented in 2022, has not been resolved in 4 years. The capsule is now at Naval Base San Diego. It will be transported to Kennedy Space Center. Engineers will remove the heat shield and examine every avcoat block individually. They will compare the damage pattern to the models that predicted how the modified trajectory should have performed. They will determine whether the cracking occurred through the same gas-trapping mechanism as Artemis I or through a different failure mode. They will measure how close the damage came to the structural limit. And they will use that data to validate or invalidate the redesigned avcoat formulation that is supposed to fly on Artemis III. The world saw astronauts waving from a helicopter. The world saw a capsule floating in calm seas. The world heard the word success repeated on every broadcast. What the world did not see was what was on the bottom of that capsule when the divers turned it over. The answer is still being assembled, photograph by photograph, scan by scan, block by block, in a clean room at Kennedy Space Center. Whatever they find down there will decide whether the Artemis program lands on the moon or stalls for years. The celebration is over. The investigation is just beginning. If you want to keep exploring what the universe is really doing, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.